Alright, so let's review how to fill out the plot diagram using the text in the enemy script. Now, there are two parts to this question. The first part was to first label the parts of the plot diagram. So let's go ahead and take a moment and do that. So here you should have put the exposition. And we know that in the exposition, it's the beginning, we learn the characters, we learn the setting, and we also learn about the conflict. Now, if you notice, up here, we have the conflict, so we'll be writing it there. Furthermore, after you get to the beginning, anything that happens afterwards is what makes the conflict more interesting. It makes it more complicated. This is called the rising action. Now, here's where some students became confused. The rising action includes events, like I said, that makes it more interesting. Things get more complicated, and it builds until you reach the climax. Now, the climax is characterized by the conflict being solved. Now, when we go over the text in the enemy script, this will make more sense. So once the conflict is solved, there are probably some things that are left over to be solved as well. This is where the falling action takes place. If there are any loose ends or anything else that needs to be addressed, that's where it takes place here. And then finally, the resolution, that's just the end. How does it end? There aren't a whole lot of events. It's really just where does the story leave you. All right, that said, and then we see up here the conflict. That's the problem that makes the story complicated and interesting. So let's look in the enemy script. Now, we start off with the exposition. We know that starts off by taking place in Vietnam, and we know it takes place 1975 in the 70s. So this is really around, like the Vietnam War, 75 to 80, we'll say. And in terms of the characters, the narrator is actually not a part of it, but he's talking about his uncle, I believe, Peter Wong. Now, we also can say it takes place in Saigon, based on the recent events. So take a look. If you did not fill this out the way it's filled in right here, go ahead and make sure that you include all this information. Now, the conflict of the story that we learn is that Peter Wong has been taken as a prisoner of war. So we'll just say Peter is a POW, which stands for prisoner of war, in a POW camp. And it's a problem because we don't know if he's going to survive. We also don't know if he's going to get out. So this is what's going to drive the events that take place. So let's move on to the rising action. So here we have, in their first prisoner of war camp, they were treated pretty poorly. They basically worked each day. They were given dirty rice. You can even mention, the charcoal, where he had to use the charcoal in order for him not to get sick. We can talk about that later. Now, a lot of you put the climax as it kept building, and of course he was moved to actually another prisoner of war camp. And so here, we thought he was going to get out, but it gets more complicated because he's been moved again. We still don't know if he's going to make it out alive. Now, here's where the problem is most people put in the climax that this was where his finger got infected, and then they were able to, there's a doctor who's also a POW who's able to rescue it. The climax is where the conflict is solved. The conflict here is Peter being a prisoner of war. The conflict is not Peter having an injured finger. So the injured finger situation, and I'll just put it there, and we all know what we're talking about, where it's actually rescued and it doesn't have to lose it. That's a part of the rising action, because again, it shows how serious he is in the camp, but we still don't know whether or not he's going to survive. So finally we get to the climax, which is, well, he's actually released. Alive. And that's the thing. So here we go. We finally figured it out. The conflict is resolved. He's out. So what's left is that, the falling action. He's still in Vietnam. There's still a lot of issues going in Vietnam. And so he's out of the POW camp. He's still not out yet. So we still need to take place. He's in an area where He's not welcome, essentially, because he's not a part of the communists. So what does he do? He escapes to the good old US of A. Not UJ, USA. Here we go. So we know that he escapes to USA, and he's actually able to stay there. And then finally, in the very end, what does he do? Well, he lives the rest of his life in USA. And you can also add in, like, thankfully. Even though not necessarily, you just know that he is thankful for opportunity. So please take a moment, look at your plot diagram, and if you need to make any adjustments, now's the time to do so.